Hey there, Real Estate Junkies. Before we dive into today's episode, we've got some game-changing resources to help you start buying and selling real estate on terms, the smart, creative way. Want to learn how to invest with little or no money down? Grab your free ebook, The 4 Game Plans, and discover the exact strategies we use every day. Get it now. The link is in the show notes. Looking for a complete step-by-step system to start making 3 paydays per deal? Check out the Quantum Leap System, our home study course packed with everything you need to close your first terms deal. Need a personalized strategy? Book a free one-on-one strategy session with one of our coaches. Just use coupon FREE3 at checkout. Ready to take action? Join the 3 Payday Apprentice Program and start working toward real estate success with direct mentorship. Want hands-on training with us? Spend 3 days at our In the Trenches Bootcamp, where we'll work side by side to lock in deals. And don't miss our biggest event of the year, QOS Live 2025. Connect with top investors, sharpen your skills, and take your business to the next level. Secure your spot today. All links are right below in the show notes. Click now and start building your real estate empire. Now, let's get into today's episode.
And you say some people, every seller is different. Some go out 20 years for estate planning or tax reasons. Some go 10, some go less. Well, the longest I could do is 6 months. Time goes by and a house sits on the market and they go through price reductions and maybe a closing or two that had failed. Then all of a sudden they call you back.
And then they start knocking on your door. Yeah, and that's why we always tell our associates, the last question you want to ask them is, what are your plans if it doesn't sell? Let's figure out a plan B in case your house doesn't sell. And a lot of times that conversation will lead into other ideas that we have to buy their homes. So yeah, we always want to ask them, hey, what are you going to do if it doesn't sell? What are your plans?
And you also ask them, is there a time frame when you might be considering looking at other options?
Oh, welcome back, everybody, to Real Estate Junkies, Coast to Coast. I'm your West Coast host, Rusty Ham.
And I'm your East Coast host, Rick Abbiati.
Tongue twister there, Rick. I got you. I got you, buddy.
Yep.
Awesome stuff. Rick, so the 3 pillars, mindset, skill set, and systems. Let's just get right into it. We're going to talk about, I think it's skill set, right? Or systems. It's going to be systems, right? It's going to be system-based, meaning how we define leads or categorize it, prioritize it, as Zach would say. And then that's our warm-up. Our game plan, we're going to talk about all of them and when to pivot, when not to pivot, which bucket to put it in, depending on what the seller wants. And then we have some In the Trenches boot camp for our cool down discussions. We have a virtual one coming up this month, in a couple of weeks. And then we have one in August. Awesome. So let's get into defining the lead. We had as coaches, we got our hands slapped a little bit on, because we were calling them active and passive. So describe why that kind of filtered into the community and what we should be calling them from now on.
So our leads are leads. Whether you classify them as passive or active, they're still lead. And classifying them as passive versus active, you can lose sight of the priority to follow up with those leads. Back when we defined that, we defined it for workflow purposes, specifically within our CRM, which a lot of us using REI Black Book. If you've got VAs, my VAs, if there is a lead that is open to creative financing, either lease purchase or loan financing, they put that as an active lead and it flags me to follow up. If it's passive, meaning they have basically passive, anybody you're going to follow up with in the future. In other words, they didn't say, oh, I sold my property, don't ever call me back, or something like that. They're just there, you're not going to follow up with them. Then anything else is a lead, period. So the passive leads could be like they have a realtor. So obviously you're going to follow up, you're going to find out how long they're under contract for, and you're going to follow up at some point in the future. my VAs call back those real people who have realtors or people who are under agreement. They find out when the closing date is, and they'll call back to follow up before that closing date is done to see if it went through or not. Or they're not interested now. They'll call back periodically according to our workflows. They'll get notified 30 days or 60 days, whatever that workflow says, and they'll call them back and follow up. So that's really the difference. It's the only difference. And the workflows are set up to handle that, to notify the VAs or yourself when to follow up. But you're going to prioritize them. We also classify them as hot or warm or cold leads. So it just depends how you want to do it, but don't lose sight of following up, because that's the most critical piece.
Yeah, the money is in the follow-up. So Zach described it as you're giving power back to the seller when you say passive. We want to be in control at all time. We talk about it on the calls too. You want to be in control of all the calls. You don't want a seller to control the call and have them asking questions. Who are you? What company are you from? This and that, where we teach our associates to regain control by just simply you're asking them the questions and just listening. So that, yeah, great point. Zach talked about prioritizing, right? You can have different priorities, right, within your leads, obviously, but we've had multiple leads. If we're talking about passive and active, we've had multiple leads that were passive at one point, but became active later on. So that's why we always want to just make it a priority, right? Once they come back into your hemisphere, meaning we've had multiple leads a year later. Hey, after we've contacted them, hey, are you still interested in selling? They're like, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden we're having this conversation with them. So they went from passive to now we're engaged, going on appointments, making offers and getting houses under contract. Yeah. So good stuff. We just wanted to clarify that and publicly apologize to our associates.
Yeah. Some of the people that they were, in fact, I've had my own where they were active leads, but I followed, in fact, one of them was since closed out with a payday 3. I did 23 or 24 follow-ups over a 14-month time frame. I could have made that a passive lead, but no, I left it as an active lead because every time I followed up, the seller was there to talk to. And
yeah, so it was a high priority, right? It was priority number one because you're actively working with the seller to try to get an offer out there that works for both the seller and yourself. The ones that are, we call it closest to a taken, which is a house under contract, we call it taken. And then the least likely to be the farthest away from a taken. Those are the ones that you've called multiple times. They're not responding to you. So that would be, we consider cold. We put them in a workflow and on our CRM where it's automated. We're following up and it's automated. Maybe the VA is going to call in 6 months from now and say, hey, you're still looking to sell, that type of thing. Usually those end up in a bucket, and that's usually your trashed bucket because they've never responded, right? So it's just, they've ghosted us for whatever reason. We've never talked to them. They've never called us back. Boom, throw it in the trash, get it out of here, right? Try to lighten the load, so to speak. Then you have the warm, which is what you've talked about, which is you talk to them, you send them an email, maybe you got an appointment, and then they've ghosted you. So you put them in a warm where you've spoken to the sellers, but they're not ready yet. Their motivation's not there. They still think they can sell their home. It's a FSBO. They're high and mighty, and they're like, no, I can sell it. It's gonna sell. They always tell, oh, it's gonna sell for sure. Or they put it back on the market with a realtor. Those are warm ones. And then, like you said, the active ones they're open to the idea. They're moving next month. They need to get out. But again, we need to find sellers that are open to terms, because terms is years, not months. So they have to wait for their money. So that's a caveat. And so that's why actives sometimes turn into or hots sometimes turn into warms, and sometimes turn into cold because they need their money right away. They don't want to wait for their money.
Yep. And that's how the status of them can really change, because they could be active to begin with. And you say, we're talking ask how long is the term, and you say some people, every seller is different. Some go out 20 years for estate planning or tax reasons. Some go 10, some go less. Well, the longest I could do is 6 months. Time goes by and the house sits on the market and they go through price reductions and maybe a closing or two that had failed. Then all of a sudden they call you back.
And then they start knocking on your door. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why we always tell our associates, the last question you want to ask them is, what are your plans if it doesn't sell? Let's figure out a plan B in case your house doesn't sell. And not a lot of times that conversation will lead into other ideas that we have to buy their homes. So yeah, we always want to ask them, hey, what are you going to do if it doesn't sell? What are your plans?
And you also ask them, is there a time frame when you might be considering looking at other options? So it gives you an idea of when you can follow up again with them.
Yep. And then again, we just trigger that into our workflow, a 3-month trigger where we're going to follow up in 3 months, something like that. Very cool. Let's pivot to our game plans. Again, our game plans, we have 4 of them: lease purchase, owner financing, sub 2, buying a house subject to the existing mortgage, and then a lease purchase, executive lease purchase, or an AO. What we've been with our associates, we've been going back and forth because some were like, when do I buy? Why would I do a lease purchase or do I do a sub 2? They always ask that. That's like their main question. Like, why wouldn't I just do a sub 2? And there's various reasons why we do a lease purchase rather than a sub 2. Describe those two because they're very similar in nature, correct?
Yeah. The only difference really, or the major difference, is you have ownership of a sub 2. So the deed would transfer. Doesn't always have, it essentially can be done contract for deed or land contract, because when you tell a seller the deed's going to transfer, they'll say, I don't want the deed transfer until it's paid in full. No
Right.
problem. You still we would still maintain ownership of it, but they're essentially, it's an attorney paperwork thing where the deed would be held in escrow. Yeah.
And then once it closes, then the title will transfer, not necessarily to us personally, it would transfer to the tenant buyer that we put in the house.
And one of the other differences is if the seller says, I want a down payment, we wouldn't do a down payment on something we don't have ownership of or any ownership of. So it would automatically go from a lease purchase to a sub 2 or a sub 2 owner finance.
Yeah. And then we talked about that in office hours too. There's one of the sellers, all she had, the house was free and clear, but there was a HELOC tied to the house. So there is a lien on it. So that would be a lease purchase. It was owner occupied. With owner occupations, we typically want to keep a lease purchase because the reason why we want to keep it under 36 months is the title is still in the seller's name. And if they go past 36 months and then it closes, there could be some tax implications. Again, we're not CPAs. We're not going to give any tax advice, but there are tax implications if it goes longer than 3 years. So if it is a lease purchase, and a lease purchase basically is just we're agreeing on a price, we're agreeing on a length of term, which again, we want to keep it under 36 months. And then we're simply going to cash them out on or before that 36 months. There's no money put down. There's no extra money on top of their lease payment, which is basically their PITI. So we want to keep that at 36 months. However, if they do want money down, like you said, what we were describing in office hours is she was talking about giving the seller some money monthly, right? A monthly payment on top of. And so since you're giving them kind of annuity payments, so to speak, owner financing type of payments where it's going towards a principal, now you want that title to transfer because you're leaving yourself exposed, right? Because now you're giving them money. If something were to happen, then you lose out on that money. So you want to own the property at that point if you're going to be investing your own capital, correct?
Yeah. And I think the caveat on the lease purchases, we just talked about doing 36 months. That's, as Rusty mentioned, it's if it's owner occupied.
Correct.
If it's not owner occupied, the minimum term you want to do is 48 months because that gives you a safety net for just in case something falls through with your tenant buyer. much like a sub-2 owner finance, it gives you time to pivot to put another tenant buyer in there.
Yeah. And so with lease purchase, again, these are sellers that don't need their money right away. They want that monthly payment to be taken care of for a period of time, because maybe it's like maybe it's empty house, or maybe it was a rental at that point. We'll take over those payments for them. We lock in their equity, and then we pay that equity out on or before 36 months. Now, could we theoretically turn it into a sub-2 if we do agree on a lease purchase, turn it into a sub-2 and make it a longer term, yeah? Because we're stopping the clock right before the 36 months. We're stopping that clock so they don't get dinged on taxes. I think it's capital gains. And then we can extend it. We can talk to the seller, maybe give them some of their equity at that point on before 36 months. We give them some of their equity, convert it into a sub-2, and then now we make it a 48 or a 60-month term. Now we're increasing our profits. We call that a payday 4, I think Chris calls it. What if we talked about because some sellers want money. They want money up front, right? Not everybody is just okay with lease purchase. Lease purchase is unusual. There's no money down. We're taking over payments, and they're waiting for their money for 36 months. Not a lot of people will be like, yeah, I want to do that. They don't see the benefits in that, other than we're saving them commissions and fees up front. We're saving all those commissions and fees.
Yeah, or if they have a high mortgage payment that is comparable to what the rents would be. And then some sellers, and I had one situation like that, where the mortgage payment was up there.
Yeah.
It's really much more benefit to the seller of getting additional payments. And there wasn't room to do that.
Yeah, like I was saying, some sellers want money up front, and they want a shorter term. That could be because you even said it. If we're gonna give them money up front, let's say 5%, we're gonna want a minimum of 48 months, if not 60. But some sellers are like, I can't wait that long. So what other options do we have if they want money up front and they want a shorter term?
Yep. And that would be pivoting to an AO or an assign out, or otherwise known as an executive lease purchase. So that we're not in the middle on that, but we're setting it all up and assigning that lease purchase agreement to the seller.
Yeah. And 10,000 foot view, we've talked about this on multiple episodes, but it's basically we go out and find a buyer who is just outside of financing, just needs some time, whether they had a little hiccup on the credit or they're self-employed. Maybe they just quit their job and they just became an entrepreneur. They need to show the lender that they make that kind of money. It's just they need some time to do that, right? So we put them in a rent-owned situation, get a non-refundable down payment from them. We share a portion of that down payment with the seller, and then we assign the contract. It is a lease purchase with the option to buy a contract with the seller. We just say, hey, here you go. We put in a nice little bow. We say, here's the contract. Here's your seller. We vetted them already. They got the money. They're good to go. The beauty of it is that they don't have the headaches of a landlord because these are buyers. They have a substantial money already invested in the home, so they're not going to sit there and trash it and wreck it. We talked about before, our success rate as far as rent-owned is really high. Me, you, and personally, right? And so that's the benefit. And it's a shorter term. It's going to be 24 months. If they want to pivot, they can pivot on their own, right? They can extend the contract if they want. They can evict the tenants if they want after 24 months if they don't fulfill their option. We just simply are just saying, hey, here's your buyers, go for it. And then we just take our portion and give the other portion to them. What are the reasons why would we pivot to an AO, to a lease purchase? Exactly.
So if you were looking at the market rent and their mortgage payment is really high and there is not enough spread that's going to make it worth it for you to stay in the deal, or if the seller has to subsidize, in other words, you can't get enough to cover the mortgage,
right,
then you would pivot to an AO, because that is something you don't want to stay in the middle of.
No.
And one caveat with the AOs, I know our numbers are roughly about 72, 73% of our takens or properties under contract are sold to tenant buyers as rent to own. Most of the reason for that is because of AOs. Because an AO is not a binding contract. It basically, the AO agreement allows us to market the property because we're not realtors.
Right.
Whereas a lease purchase is under a binding lease purchase agreement, and a sub-2 owner finance is under a purchase and sales agreement, which is binding also. So the seller can back out after a certain, I've had sellers back out because they're impatient or they get a buyer, a traditional buyer that approaches them. Well, they can back out of it. So.
Cool. And then owner financing, we didn't really touch on it, but it's beneficial to sellers if it's free and clear. A lot of sellers for tax purposes, like you said, or estate planning would prefer to just get payments over time a lot of them for tax purposes. It really helps out with the capital gains. Again, we're not CPAs. We're not telling you. I want to make that perfectly clear, but we have seen in the past that it helps sellers with their capital gains and their tax issues. We've also, for estate planning, Chris did an owner financing on his building, his office building. The seller was adamant that he didn't want to get cashed out early because normal owner financing, our minimum is 5 years, but we want to extend that because there's a lot of different ways we can exit. And so the seller with Chris is like, don't cash me out. Even if I pass away, I want my kids to get this monthly payment that he was getting. Right. And so some sellers are like, hey, I want this annuity payment. If I were to pass, I want it to go into a trust, and I want that money to go into a trust so that it gets distributed to all the people that are beneficiaries. Right. So that is the benefit with owner financing. You get more money over time. And again, we're looking for sellers, and I want to emphasize this. We are looking for sellers that have time, that they don't need their money today, and they have time and they can wait. And in that case, they're going to maximize the amount of money they have in the home. Because once you sell it traditionally, you're getting dinged on commissions and fees, and it just really it eats away. I'm selling my sub-2 traditionally. It's going to eat away at some of my profits that I thought I was going to get with these tenant buyers. But I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, not as far as that goes, but the other instance, and we mentioned this before, if they mention down payment, it automatically becomes a sub-2 and or owner finance. And the difference being you're doing the sub-2 on the existing mortgage balance and an owner finance of the equity. But if they mention down payment or interest, then it's automatically going to be a sub-2 and or owner finance.
Right, because you're investing in your own capital at that point. And we talked about it before. You don't want to be left high and dry. You want to own that property so that you have more control, right? Because if there's money involved, as far as money coming out of your pocket, you want to have control of that property. Awesome stuff, Rick. Let's pivot into our cool down, which we usually talk about the In the Trenches boot camp. I think we do it every trimester.
Every 2 months, I believe it is what we've been speaking to.
Yeah, we do trimesters in our company, so it's every trimester. We host a virtual In the Trenches boot camp, meaning it's a 3-day thing, 2 days. No, it's a 1-day thing, but it's 3 hours.
Yep.
Yeah, it's 3 hours. First hour. Oh, okay. So a typical In the Trenches is the first day we make phone calls for sellers, for associates. Second day is we go over deal structure, which usually incorporates the previous day, which, you make a call with the seller, and then we do some deal structure of that deal. And then the third day is we pick somebody and work out their numbers to see if, what kind of business that they want to, I don't know, I'm brain farting, but the strategy call, get certain associates thinking as a business, right? That's because a lot of people, they get in, they just think, oh, I'm just going to buy a couple of houses. They're not thinking as entrepreneurs or business owners, right? So that strategy session is, hey, if you do X, this, and this, you're going to make X amount, and you're going to create a business. So that's the idea of the strategy session. So usually in person In the Trenches boot camp is a 3-day event. We're taking those 3 days and we're combining it into hours. So the first hour is going to be calling sellers. Second hour is going to be deal structure. And third hour is going to be strategy session with somebody, right? That's usually what the virtual In the Trenches bootcamp is going to be. That is going to be July 17th. So again, go into the links in show notes and click on that and sign up for the virtual one. That's for anybody, right? That's not for just associates.
Yes. Yeah.
And then in August, I'm not sure when the August one, there is an in-person In the Trenches bootcamp in August.
It's up 4th, 5th, and 6th.
4th, 5th, and 6th. Okay. And then you were saying off camera, what did Chris do? What did he purchase? What are you guys going to be doing?
We've got an audio video system that's being installed in the conference room.
Wow. Why is that? That's cool stuff.
It's people that that cannot attend in person, and that it is invite only. So it's case by case basis. So people can get on through Zoom. And so we'll have a camera set up so they can see the whole conference room and hear everybody.
Oh yeah. Cause we normally just open up a laptop and do Zoom.
Yeah.
And you can't see everybody who's there. You're basically looking at, it's usually Chris or Zach that's on the whiteboard that they see, right?
Yeah. Or one of us making calls.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool. Cause then you can invite certain people to, it wouldn't be necessarily Zoom. I guess it would be Zoom. It would just be that you'd be able to see everybody and see what the interaction is going to, it's like you're almost there, which is cool. It's important that let me just say this though. It's important that you go. So if you definitely want to go to the In the Trenches bootcamp in Rhode Island, I highly recommend that you go in person because you definitely get the experience, right? We've had multiple deals come out of these In the Trenches bootcamp, more than I've ever seen.
Yeah, because Rusty said, we're making phone calls for you and we're talking to the sellers, structuring the deal. Usually you'll leave there with an appointment out of that. So you're setting yourself up to really take off the right way.
Yeah. And
getting a strategy, as you mentioned, Rusty, that we're looking at, okay, what's your why? What are your goals? And then breaking that down into individual KPIs and what's needed to get to that point.
Yeah, because one of the questions Chris asked you is or Zach will ask you, what amount do you need in order to leave your job? I think that's what they asked. That's what they asked me. That's what they asked you when you were ready to leave. Okay, Rick, what amount do you need in order to leave your job? And if you need that, then this is what you need to do. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And that's what's cool about that. Yeah. Very cool. Thanks, Rick. You are the best. I can't wait for the coach's call tomorrow. Inside joke for people who are listening, but Rick, we'll see you tomorrow and have a great day, man.
It was great being with you, Rusty. As always.
All right. Take care, everybody. See ya.
Take care.